Hello, happy gamers! This is Tarek the Gamer Dragon, and welcome to the first episode of Build Your Rig, the series where I take orders for gaming PCs, and you can watch me build them and share some of my tips on how to get the best gaming performance. Today's build will be a powerful 1440p gaming machine. For our motherboard, I'm using the ASRock B550 Taichi with steampunk accent. It has 2 slots for M.2 storage and supports PCIe Gen 4 and up to 128 gigabytes of RAM. For the CPU, I went with the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X. This is a 6-core, 12-threaded processor with enough power to handle all of your 1440p gaming needs. Looking at benchmark comparisons, the 5600X has very similar performance to the Intel i5-12600. However, at current prices, the 5600X is a much better value at $165 compared to $279 for the 12600. To install the CPU, lift the retaining lever like so, then match the tiny gold arrow on the CPU with the arrow on the CPU socket. Gently drop the CPU into place and return the retaining lever to its original position. For RAM, I chose this Silicon Power Zenith RGB kit. It has 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory with 3200 megabytes per second transfer speed and a latency of 16 clock cycles. This is a solid looking RAM kit with built-in addressable RGB lighting that's going to look great in our case. We're going to install the RAM in slots 1 and 3 in order to make use of this motherboard's support for dual-channel memory. Pull back the clips on each slot to open them. Be careful to note the notch in each stick of RAM and match it up with the tab in each RAM slot. There's only one way to insert them correctly. Insert the RAM stick into the slot and press down on both ends until you hear solid clicks, indicating that the clips have closed and secured the RAM in place. To keep the CPU nice and cool, I went with this NZXT Kraken 120mm all-in-one liquid cooler. But before I can install it, I need to add some thermal paste to my CPU to promote optimal heat transfer from the CPU to the cooler. A couple of dabs of paste on the CPU, and I can clip down the cooler on top. Be sure to screw the cooler down just a bit at a time on each side to make sure that the thermal paste spreads evenly underneath. For storage, I grabbed this Inland QN322 2TB SSD. Though this isn't a PCI Gen 4 SSD, it still supports transfer speeds up to 2300 megabytes per second. That's plenty fast for today's gaming. Remove the included SSD heat spreader from the motherboard to expose the SSD slot. Hold the SSD at a 45-degree angle to the slot and press firmly until it slides fully into the slot. If you can push the SSD down to match the screw offset, then it's inserted correctly. The heat spreader has a thermal pad on the back that helps pull heat away from the SSD. Screw the heat spreader down tightly on top of the SSD. Now for the case. This is the part of the computer that you're going to be looking at the most. I decided to use the Rosewill Prism S500, which is a solid case with RGB lighting, plenty of ventilation, and a tempered glass side panel. This case is a little unusual because the power supply shroud is located at the top of the case instead of the bottom. Speaking of which, the power supply I chose is the Corsair RM850X. This power supply is certified 80+ gold with an A-tier rating on the PSU tier list. It comes with 2 CPU power connectors required by this motherboard. Also need to hook up 2 PCIe power cords for the video card and a SATA power cable for the RGB lighting. Now, regardless of whether your PSU is placed top or bottom, you want to install it with the intake fan pointing downward to ensure that it gets proper airflow. You'll find these screws with a hex-shaped head included with your case or with your power supply. Fasten the PSU to the back of the case at these 4 points. The AIO radiator is going to go here, so this fan needs to be moved. These screws will be used to secure the motherboard into the case. Be sure to match up all of the screw holes in your motherboard to the standoffs in the case, and fasten the motherboard securely. This plate here is for mounting 2.5-inch SSD drives, but we're not going to be using those in this build. Hidden behind the plate are additional fan mounts that allow for more airflow through the case, so I'm going to mount the extra fan here. The AIO cooler needs to radiate and exhaust hot air out of the case, so I'm mounting it here at the back. Since I've got 4 intake fans and only 1 exhaust fan, this case will have what is called positive airflow, where the air pressure from the intake fans helps to push air out of the case. These are the radiator fan and radiator pump plug-ins. They need to be plugged into the CPU fan and water pump headers on the motherboard. Now, we'll plug in the CPU power and main motherboard power cables. Finally, the most important part of this gaming build, the GPU. I chose the PowerColor Radeon RX 6700 XT. This is a solid video card for 1440p gaming, and it can even handle 4K gaming at medium to high settings. Be sure to watch to the end of the video to see the gaming performance benchmarks on this card. Now, comparing the 6700 XT to the NVIDIA 3060 and 3060 Ti, it actually has a pretty solid lead over the 3060, while trailing just a bit behind the 3060 Ti in performance. However, the 6700 XT has 12 gigabytes of VRAM compared to only 8 gigabytes on the 3060 Ti. There are some AAA games that demand more than 8 gigabytes at high settings, and this trend is only going to increase in the future. Before installing the GPU, be sure that this clip is pressed down. This will open up the slot so the GPU can be inserted properly. Insert the GPU into the slot and press down carefully but firmly until you hear an audible click, which means that the clip is engaged and the GPU is secured to the motherboard. To power up the GPU, insert these PCIe power plugs into the power slots on the card. The USB 3 case cable plugs into the motherboard here. This is the RGB fan controller plug, and that goes right here. HD audio from the case gets connected to the HD audio header, here on the motherboard. This part is always really scary for me, turning the machine on for the first time. Fortunately, it looks like I've got everything hooked up properly. Now, for a few game benchmarks. All of these games were tested at the highest settings available at 1080p, 1440p, and even 4K resolution. While this machine did struggle to reach 60 frames per second in some games at 4K, it had no problem achieving great frame rates at 1440p and showed amazing performance at 1080p. While this isn't the first rig that I've ever built, this is the first rig I've made into a video. This machine is currently up for sale. If you want to get your hands on this powerhouse of a gaming machine, please check the links below. I really love doing this. It's a lot of fun for me. Finding all of the different parts for a computer and then putting them together for less money than it would cost to buy a new machine at a retailer, that is awesome. And that lights a fire under me. Since I'm really doing this as a hobby, I want to do a favor for you guys out there. I want to connect 5 gamers with a great gaming PC where the work I do on the PC is for free. What that means is for the next 5 orders that I receive, I will do the work of research, building, installation, testing, benchmarking for free. And what that means is that the PC will cost only the base cost of the parts that I put together with it, plus any shipping that it requires to get it out to you. And the rest is free. So if you really want a great gaming PC and you want to spend less cash, why don't you let me build your rig?